Hello everyone, welcome back. Let's continue with a focus on political risk. Well, political risk analysis is both an art and a science. Many components cannot be quantified with a few formulas or even with econometrics. That's good news. Political risk requires analysis and a good dose of culture. The key questions are how resilient is the political system? Is there a tradition of peaceful transitions of power? How robust are the social shock absorbers that provide buffers between individual citizens and governments? And is there economic growth or sustainable and inclusive development? That are the key questions. Well, one can focus on 5 main techniques and methods to analyze political risk. We shall look in more detail at the Prince model and at ratings and rankings of political risk. As I keep repeating, the key risk mitigation tool remains a robust source of information and access to economic intelligence. There's a number of information sources, mainly private, though one can include MIGA, the World Bank, OPIC, and why not the CIA. Well, one way of analyzing political risk is to identify a country's power structure, which means asking what is the base of national identity or the key sources of tensions and polarization. It can be a charismatic leader, it can be ethnic homogeneity, it can be also religious unity, or a repressive regime that will impose order and unity. Here we have the political power structure in China to sum up the complex and intricate relationships between the Politburo, the Central Committee, the State Council, and also the People's Congress. Now, once the power structure has been identified, the political risk analyst can map it out using the Prince model that is simply a way of illustrating the main power groups, the tensions or alliances between them, and their impact on a specific business strategy in the country. Clearly, the exposure of an investor is not the same, of course, as that of an exporter or a banker or a domestic resident in the country. This is, for example, the Prince model applied to Ivory Coast. The Prince model gets quickly obsolete in fast-changing political systems and volatile regimes. It must be updated with ongoing fine-tuning. Sometimes the Prince is not where you would expect him to be. Look, in Germany, the Prince is not the president, Mr. Frank-Walter Steinmeier. It is a chancellor, of course. And in the UK, the Prince is not the Queen. Well, now let's give a look at ratings and rankings. They can be very, very useful for cross-country comparisons, but they will never replace an in-depth analysis of a country's political power structures. Indeed, can one boil things down to number, ratios, or indicators when dealing with culture, politics, and ethnic tensions? I don't think so. Well, the idea indeed is to boil a country down to a number of indicators with a specific weighting system, but keeping in mind that the weighting must be the same across time and across countries. Otherwise, the comparison will be distorted. And this is one of the many limitations and biases and pitfalls of ratings and rankings. Rating production has increased tremendously since the late 1990s. Today, one can identify at least 20 political risk ranking agencies, of which the most well-known are the ones on the chart, including Euromoney, Transparency International, ICRG, Freedom House, and the Heritage Foundation. Looking, for example, at ICRG, the analysis of political risk is broken down in 12 indicators, each one with a specific weighting, ranging from government stability and conflict, the most important, to bureaucratic quality. Strangely enough, as you can see, religious and ethnic tensions have a very modest weight of only 6% each. Not much, I think. Freedom House is a watchdog organization, an NGO, funded at least partly by the US government, and it's dedicated to the expansion of freedom of democracy around the world. It publishes an annual assessment of the state of freedom in all countries in the world, around 200, based on a checklist of questions on political rights and civil liberties. In 2017, only 45% of countries are quote-unquote free, most of them, but not all, members of the OECD. The list of free countries also includes, indeed, Botswana and Mauritius. China is not considered a free country, nor Algeria. MIG, a Merchant International Group, is a strategic research and corporate intelligence company based in London. The company's services include counter-risk research, intelligence, and investigative capability. MIG provides an annual global terrorism index that is being used by insurance companies and counter-risk analysts to measure the risk in specific countries. As you can see, the US is considered more risky than Indonesia. A similar index, in fact, is provided by the Institute of Economics and Peace based on a wide number of indicators, probably 12, that illustrate and measure both domestic and external violence and stability. Let's look now at governance that includes opacity and corruption. Transparency International has been set up in the late 1990s by colleagues of mine, a team of former World Bank economists. They decided to cast light on bad governance and corruption, something that was not enough at the heart of the World Bank lending process. This new NGO, namely Transparency International, is based in Berlin, and it aims at tackling corruption. Now, every year, the CPI, the Corruption Perception Index, comes up with a rating of 180 countries. Now, the BRICS show very poor ratings, that is high corruption, but France has no lesson to give. Its ranking is mediocre at 23 and not improving. Most of the worst corrupt countries are rich countries with poor people and often with an oil or mining economic growth that is conducive to extreme power and wealth concentration. Well, finally, the World Bank started to focus on governance in the late 1990s. Governance represents the quality of public and private institutions, and it can be measured by a number of indicators, including, of course, corruption, but also accountability, political stability, and regulatory quality. The worst governance indicators are found in countries in the Middle East, in Latin America, and in Africa. However, one can find improvements in governance quality in South Africa, in Botswana, and also in Morocco. Using 6 sub-indicators of governance, the World Bank provides an interesting comparative measure across countries and across time. If we look at China, for example, government effectiveness is good, we know that, but it's very centralized, with a very strong power structure. But voice and accountability is very limited and not much improving. The Mo Ibrahim Foundation is an African NGO, quite interesting, established back in 2006, with one focus, the critical importance of governance in Africa. And every year, the foundation publishes a specific index for African countries only. Now, reportedly, the index of governance is based on a research combining 95 indicators, 14 subcategories, overall in 4 broad categories. As we can see, the top 10 countries are also those that we can find in the World Bank or in Transparency International. Not big surprise. Now, why is corruption at the heart of political risk analysis? Well, corruption is not an obstacle to economic growth, but it impedes the transformation of growth into sustainable and inclusive development. Clearly, there is a strong correlation, as you can see, between low corruption and high development. What is clear also is that corruption is not a fate, like tsunamis or hurricanes. It's a policy choice to loot a country's revenues and to concentrate the wealth, into the hands of a small group of corrupt officials. Most of the time, corruption is widespread in rich countries with poor people, where growth is based on mining or oil export revenues. That's the case of Chad, Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Angola, and Nigeria. Rich countries, poor people, and very large corruption. Now, dynamic growth, as I said, can go hand in hand with low governance and high corruption. The example is that of mining countries. Look, for example, at Congo, Cameroon, Libya, and Gabon, or Turkmenistan. Growth is based on the hydrocarbon revenues without much impact on local populations. In fact, The only contrary example, I think, is Norway and its $850 billion wealth fund for the future generations. Indeed, oil resources and raw materials contribute to wealth concentration, weak governance, and large corruption. Look at these countries that have the same revenue per capita, but considerable differences in life expectancy and level of development. One can live 25 years more in Sri Lanka than in Angola, the OPEC country rich in oil but deeply corrupt. Algeria, for example, has the 10th largest reserves of natural gas in the world and is the 6th largest gas exporter. In fact, Sonatrach is close to have 1/3 of the country's GDP. Now, the business index of Algeria is worse than Iraq, Iran, Nigeria, and Liberia. Tunisia, in the meantime, has phosphates, beautiful beaches, Roman archaeology, agriculture, and olive oil, but not much petroleum, and much better gender equality. Well, overall, governance and policy choices matter to transform economic growth into inclusive socio-economic development. Per capita income grows faster under democracy, mainly because democracy provides a stable political environment, hence a positive impact on sustainable growth. There is a positive feedback force between economic development, good governance, and democracy. Democracy breeds GDP per capita growth, while economic growth reinforces democracy. Well, over the very long term, income per capita and democracy are correlated because economic and socio-political institutions will transform gradually growth into sustainable and inclusive development. This is why political risk assessment is such a fascinating and intriguing topic that requires open-minded, historical, and a comparative approach. Stay tuned. Thank you.